Imagine this, a nuclear wasteland, thousands of kilometers of ruins, mutants and raider gangs. And here's the question, why do we travel only on foot? Why do traders rely on brahmin to carry their goods instead of trucks? Why, in a land covered with the shells of hundreds of cars, do we never see anyone driving them? America before the war was a nation built on cars. For every family, a car was more than just transport, it was freedom, comfort, and part of everyday life. And yet, in Fallout, all those cars are now nothing but rusted monuments of the past.
And the car! How do you polish rust?
So, where did all the working cars go? In fact, cars have always existed in the series. They even appeared in 2 games in the franchise, and in one of them you could drive them, not just use them for fast travel. But more on that later, because in the most popular titles they are missing. So, where are they? At first it might seem like a simple oversight by the developers, but the real answer is much deeper. It hides in game design, in the lore of Fallout, and even in the philosophy behind the series. To understand this, let's go back to the very beginning. The first Fallout games were isometric RPGs from the 90s. The technology of that time was very limited. On those old engines, drivable cars were almost impossible to create. And yet, in Fallout 2, the developers gave players something special, the Highwayman. This car allowed the Chosen One to travel between towns much faster, but even here, you never really drove it. It was used only for fast travel. One of the designers later admitted that they dreamed of more: armor plates, mounted weapons, maybe even open driving across the wasteland, but Black Isle simply didn't have the resources or the tools to make that dream real. When the series moved into 3D with Fallout 3 and New Vegas, things didn't get easier. The Gamebryo engine was already unstable, the game often crashed even without cars, and adding driving would have made it unplayable. Gamebryo simply didn't support vehicle physics. But still, Bethesda tried to experiment. In one DLC quest, players were able to ride the Metro, and naturally fans asked, if the Metro works, why not cars? One gamer finally discovered the truth, and now I'll show it to you.
No.
The Metro train was not really moving. In fact, Bethesda placed the wagon on top of invisible NPCs who were forced to run under the floor at high speed to push it forward. A clever trick, but also proof of how difficult vehicles were to implement. And even years later, modders never managed to create proper drivable cars. This shows just how serious the limitations were. But even if the technology allowed it, cars would still change the game too much. Fallout was always built around slow exploration. You walk, you search, you find hidden locations, and you feel the tension of every step. You never know if a mutant or a raider is waiting around the corner. If cars existed, this feeling would vanish. Exploration would become too easy, and the danger of the wasteland would disappear. The change to 3D also made cars less necessary. In Fallout 1 and 2, players moved across a giant map with only key towns inside it. But in Fallout 3 and later, the world became smaller but much richer in detail. Every street and every corner mattered. For these compact maps, cars were simply not needed. Exploring on foot was part of the design. Of course, Fallout isn't just limited by technology. Transport still exists in some form. In Fallout 4's Far Harbor expansion, players travel by boat to reach the island. In Nuka World, there's an abandoned monorail that still runs after the war. These examples show that transport never disappeared completely. It simply became scripted, used to move the player to new places, not as a true gameplay feature. And if cars ever return to Fallout, they will most likely work in the same way. But there are also lore reasons why cars don't exist. Real fuel goes bad after about a year. Motor oil lasts maybe 5. 200 years after the bombs fell, there would be none left. Tires are another issue. Even when new, they lose their strength after only 6 to 10 years. After the war, making new rubber was impossible. So, even if someone found a working car, it wouldn't run for long. At this point you might ask, why does fuel matter if Fallout cars are nuclear? And that's true. Many of them used atomic engines. But here's the problem. By the time of the war, only a handful of working normal cars were left, and atomic cars were simply too dangerous. For example, here's what MacCready might say if you're passing through an area full of cars.
Reminder, cars and bullets don't mix.
One bullet into the reactor and the entire car would explode like a bomb. For survivors, these cars were not a gift, they were a death trap. That's why most people avoided them. Interestingly, the idea of nuclear cars was not invented by Fallout. In 1957, Ford introduced the Ford Nucleon, a concept car with a miniature nuclear reactor. It looked futuristic, with a long body, panoramic windows, and a heavy back part for the reactor. The plan was that drivers could swap reactor modules and travel thousands of kilometers without refueling. Of course, this idea never became real. In the 1950s, mini reactors were science fiction, but the concept became a symbol of faith in the atomic future. Fallout clearly took inspiration from this aesthetic. Cars like the Corvega and the Chrysler are direct descendants of the Nucleon in design and spirit. Still, most Fallout technology went into war: power armor, robots, weapons. This was the real focus. After the war, the Enclave inherited much of this knowledge. They became the continuation of the old US government. Their base was on an oil rig in the ocean, where cars were useless. Instead, they developed air transport. Vertibirds became their main vehicle, and later the Brotherhood of Steel used them as well. Air travel was faster, safer, and much more useful than cars. This is why even 2 centuries after the war, we still see working turrets, drones, and vertibirds, while civilian cars are nothing but rusting shells. Of course, there are exceptions. Fallout 2 had the Highwayman. And interestingly, in Fallout 1, the super mutants may have had their own form of transportation. According to the account of a refugee from Necropolis after the city was overrun by the Master's army, the super mutants attacked. We were slaughtered. They had guns and bombs, even some steam trucks. They killed my friends. The mutants just butchered us. This is one of the few direct mentions of vehicles. Fallout 3 also shows Brotherhood trucks. They never move in the game, but inside their backs we find crates with clean water. Why place them there if the trucks don't drive? Maybe the Brotherhood really used them, but the engine never allowed us to see it. In Fallout New Vegas, the NCR army seems to use trucks, but only as supply vehicles. At Camp McCarran, you can even find a whole repair depot with pre-war trucks, prepared for maintenance and apparently used for transporting soldiers and supplies. There are also several NCR supply trucks parked near the barracks tents. This shows that transport exists in the lore, even if the player never sees it in motion. In the Fallout Bible, Chris Avallone also explained how many cars the NCR had per person and what condition they were in, an inevitable consistency question from Bud Klein. Last update, you said there were 1 car per 200 people in the NCR. If there were so many working cars in NCR, where were they? They're there, it's game logic. You don't see them for the same reason NCR is only 3 maps, only has 1 councillor or senator, and only about 40-50 people in its city limits. And before you get the image of tanks and jeeps flying around everywhere with heavy machine guns mounted on the back, most of that junk is old tractors and crap like taxis, old buses, snowplows, and even old construction equipment. By the way, there is 1 game in the series called Fallout Tactics: Brotherhood of Steel. In this entry, the player could directly control vehicles, jeeps, buggies, armored transports, and even a real tank. This is still the only time in the franchise where vehicles became a full part of the gameplay. However, Bethesda officially considers Fallout Tactics to be semi-canon. This means its events and details can be included or ignored depending on how well they fit the overall story. Because of that, vehicles from Tactics are rarely brought up in the main Fallout titles, even though that game featured them in the most complete way. And finally, we come to the most important point: philosophy. Fallout is very different from other post-apocalyptic worlds. In Mad Max, the car is life itself. Without a car, you are nothing. But Fallout tells a different story. Cars in Fallout are not freedom, they are tombstones of a dead civilization. They remind us that humanity had the tools to save itself, but chose war instead. Before the bombs, the United States already had nuclear batteries, household robots, suitcase-sized reactors, technology that could have saved the world. But the leaders invested in weapons and military power. And so, 200 years later, the cars that once symbolized freedom now stand silent, rusting in the streets. Fallout shows us that cars are not vehicles for survival, but symbols of failure. They remind us of the chances humanity had and lost. Could cars ever return in the series? In theory, yes. In NCR or the Midwest, working vehicles could exist, but from a gameplay perspective, Bethesda and Obsidian avoid this choice. Cars would make exploration too easy and remove the danger from every step across the wasteland. Most likely, cars will remain only as part of the scenery, sometimes appearing in quests, but never as something we can drive. So the answer to why are there no cars in Fallout is not one reason, but many. The limits of the old engines, the balance of the gameplay, the logic of the lore, no fuel, no rubber, dangerous nuclear engines, the focus on military technology, and finally, the philosophy of the series itself. Fallout tells us that cars in this world are not tools of survival, they are reminders of the death of civilization. They are symbols of what humanity could have been, but chose not to be. And this is why, no matter where we go, we will always walk the wasteland on foot.